and we'll be sharing it later for those who are unable to make it live, just so you are aware of that. I also want to suggest that you might come visit us, not in person, unfortunately, but at our virtual book center. Of course, they're in the chat. I've shared a link. And of course, we have books for sale by both Tara and Jennifer. So come take a look, including House and Its Hunger and Break the Habit and others. So. In order to create the greatest possible access to our program, we've been operating on a give what you can basis. And with this in mind, I also want to share a donation link. If you're in a position to do so, here's that in the chat. We would greatly appreciate your support. But of course, we're deeply grateful for your support being here as well, which is incredibly important. So thank you. Upcoming, we have a 100,000 Poets for Change event Saturday, next Saturday, September 26th. That'll be an afternoon event, a matinee at 2 p.m., probably roughly 2 to 4, depending. We've got about a little over 20 poets reading in little short bursts, so you'll get to hear a lot of amazing poetry from a lot of folks in and around Milwaukee. And let's see, I've already know that we're recording. I'm just like reading through my notes here. And then also the chat is open to, if you want to show some love, but also to field questions after the reading. And I'll say more about that when we get to that point. But for now, let's get to the reading. We're going to start with Jennifer. So Jennifer Steele is a native of Middleton, Connecticut, a Chicagoan, and the author of the chapbook, A House and Its Hunger. She received her MFA in poetry from Columbia College, Chicago in 2008, and is a 2015 Callaloo Fellow and 2016 Poetry Incubator Fellow. She is the executive director of 826 Shy, Writing and Publishing Center, amplifying the voices and stories of youth in 1st through 12th grades. She was featured in New City's 2020 Lit 50 and is the inaugural recipient of the 2015 Lucille Clifton Creative Parent Award from Raising Mothers magazine. Her work has appeared in numerous publications, and she's currently working on a full-length collection entitled Belt and developing a collection of creative nonfiction. In A House and Its Hunger, Steele's lines offer intricately woven catalogs of objects and memories. They're lines that have a density, a tensile strength, but which are characterized as well by delicacy, by language that defers, quote, an open concept of air and suspension. And there's so much in Steele's poems, the ephemerality of embodiment and experience, our transient tendencies, meditations on the ways we inhabit, remember, and move through spaces, including our own interior worlds. And every inch of these spaces is imbued with life, from the personified spider to the corporeal earth, quote, each follicle of tree and blade. And this abundance of life carries on, quote, years after our footsteps have been washed away. With clear-eyed attention, Steele articulates this distance, this absence. As Parnisha Jones notes, quote, what wasn't said in those long-lost memories gets said and heard in these beguiling poems. It's a great pleasure to welcome Jennifer Steele.
Thank you, Michael. It's always, I always blush a little when you hear this intro, so thank you so much for that beautiful and wonderful introduction. And just want to thank Woodland Pattern for having us this evening, and of course the Tara Betts being here and reading with me as well. I'm going to start by reading a few poems from A House and Its Hunger. So here's the book, so you all can see it. The cover is a photograph by the photographer Clifton Henry, who is a Chicago-based photographer. So really wonderful. So I had to keep it Chicago all the way through. So I'm going to begin with a few poems from A House and Its Hunger. Night Gossip. Lately, I've been conversing with your closet. Hold pillow talk by lamplight with your hat forgotten on the nightstand. I ask your shoes about your day. Your sweaters hung for night watch ask me why they never change guard with the season. We swap stories of being put on and taken off, my jealousy and how lucky they all are to be yours. I could learn to love this loneliness, disassemble your ghost, and make good use of the bedroom's dark, eager affections, the sheet's sympathy and its night gossip, about how many pillows it takes under here to sculpt me, neck to toe, a side sleeper, how I choke one to cool my breast and nuzzle my cheek into its chest. I keep another knee locked for balance, to keep the pain out of my hips. Keep this secret, I say, my fashioning view. When I come home hungry. I want your hands breaking, lettuce or an egg, your care with a shell, cutting and stirring what steams out the day's work. Its lip marks on my blouse collar, anticipating seat and plate, the plush night of my body. You ask if I've eaten the last of the leftovers, where seasonings you love have gone. I've thrown them all away. I want what you feed me dirty-fingered, a marinated mess of rare meat my teeth crave. You, here and wild, in culinary fury, making a wish meal of chopped onions and parmesan, crumbled butter bread and tuna no longer lost in our cabinets. Your mouth salt-rimmed, tongue a spoon, full and asking to tell you how it tastes. Sorry. Too much technology. I'm going off at the same time, I apologize. So these next couple of poems that I'm going to read are include the same title. So there are a series of poems within the publication that include the same title. And, you know, I've often gotten questions like, you know, why have you done that? And what I really love about that concept is the idea that sometimes, or particularly for me, I find myself really loving a concept or a title or a line, and it opens up the window for what the poem can become. And where the poems can take me. So I enjoy that aspect of just sort of seeing if I start with this one title and I start it over and over again, what are the new stories that come about? What are the multitude of stories that this one phrase, these series of words are trying to tell? So the next two poems are entitled, Where is Your Husband? And this is interesting. I think it was a very interesting concept. I sat down with a friend one day actually, and I was like, what if someone asks you, where is your husband? So it's just this idea of, you know, when you are not partnered, right, you get a lot of questions about being partnered or becoming partnered. And really this idea of, you know, being partnered and the Institute of Marriage and things like that. So we just sat down and had a little bit of fun with it. So these poems are kind of coming out of that. So here's the first, where is your husband? Where is your husband? I ate him. Always wanting to fish and hook me from the inside, he lived well on the meals I made for him, saffron soup, couscous, and apple pie. My mother's macaroni and cheese served on porcelain dinner plates, shine for good company. I took up the gut of his hunger, and I couldn't help myself. Pumped him up for years on my silences, and the scrubbing and washing of ovens and babies, my exit from our bed each morning to work. Eating at the table of my torso was a ritual. The lie and shit at the mouth about his day. I tried boiling him last fall with his appetite for lobsters, stuffed him into the scalding water, got as far as covering his head with the pot top, but his claws gripped the edge. He survived his drowning. I decided on a softening instead, waited on the slow thaw, took his "but you're so warm" and brushed and baked him in lathers of butter and sage from my 2 hands. I let him think he was eating me down first. When he was ready, I sat cross-legged on the kitchen floor, Didn't need much, just fork and knife, a long drag of the aroma to treasure the feet. I bit down and savored what I'd cooked so long from love. I watched what went into my body. So hungry, what else was I supposed to do? So this next Where Is Your Husband poem, I am a huge fan of The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, and I love Carol Kane. So I grew up watching Scrooged. My dad, and that's always, the Carol Kane scene is always my favorite scene in that movie. And so if you watch it, you know that she is, essentially this landlord, but there's a storyline for her where her husband is buried in the wall. And so, again, a little bit of play came into this poem. And so I just love the way she said it so casually and almost, as if it was completely a normalized thing to do. Where is your husband? Like I said, I ate him all up. As a baby, my mother mixed blood from my brother's wounds into my milk to know the taste of men as defense. My husband climbed a tree in the dead of a storm to touch the light. He wanted to wipe his hands clean. My husband is stuck to the bottom of my shoe. My husband will ruin in the wash. He was always curious about how to get inside and never took time to learn front doors. My husband is double fisting a nail and hammer. My husband has the tendency to crawl into a cast iron duel. He is not here, but somewhere in this belly of mine. Pick a lock, any lock. He was never my husband. Can you not smell him on me? You tell me. My husband took my heart out to play. Pick a floorboard, any floorboard. He is holding a gun. He is wielding a sledgehammer bigger than himself and tiring himself out. My husband shows himself in the shape of our son's ears, who crawls into my lap and asks me to sing him to sleep. My husband is a stray. He is playing host. Check her purse. He has a tendency to wander and lock himself in tiny rooms. My husband falls asleep to his own discordant music. My husband talks too much shit. He has no name. He was never my husband. I ate him. I drank him down. He was here a minute ago, looking for me. I get lost so easily. So I've been feeling in a very lighthearted mood, so we're gonna move to a couple of love poems. So I feel like, at the time when so much is going on, we could all use a little bit of love, right? So this last poem I'm gonna read from the collection is Dear You, and it is also a poem that shares a title with other poems in the collection. So, Dear You. When you learn all of the faces of each shade of sky, there's a particular gray that brings a soft release of snow onto snow. When the sound of the train breaks the wind apart, jealous, like a not yet lover, and the roaring, which calls for sparks, can be heard for blocks. There is stillness in the thick white coating of a residential street. Down a long line of trees, their branches powdered and bronzed, shading city lamps and house lights set to some romantic dim. I think of you in the untouching of roads. There is no one here but me, and perhaps you, as thought, as hologram beside me. I want to stay and feel the wind bend the necks of trees into its kiss, giving just enough shiver in the bones. And so as Michael mentioned, I grew up in Connecticut. So I grew up in Middletown, Connecticut, and my mom is here. So she's also zooming in from Middletown, Connecticut right now. And we have this really wonderful harbor park. So this poem is set in Connecticut. So this is Trust Fall. On a summer night along the Connecticut River, where we are stealing time from the curfew of a park, where no one but the fishermen joins our nightly company, my tongue keeps calling the mosquito a king. Sitting atop the railing between me and the water, my fingers loosen without warning from the swallow of your neck, investigating your reflexes and how long the weight of my body pushing against your forearms will hold. You try to teach me about other muscles and how my tongue can shape itself into song. Lend me your language under stars, but I fail the notes over and over. I don't want to sing or trumpet my guilt for not knowing the origin of my skin or what languages are christened in the caverns of my taste buds. I won't butcher the beauty, expose the truth I carry in my unrooted mouth. All I know is that I am a girl who enjoys falling backwards without warning into the middle of the night and the thrill and the risk of not being caught in time. I tell you I can't sing, but you smile and say, I am getting there. I've got you, me mafi, no matter how many times the king is a mosquito. And what I'll note, which I apologize for not noting it sooner, so me mafi is Efik, which is a language of Nigeria, which means I love you. So me mafi, everyone. So these next couple of poems relate a lot to, I've been having a lot of thought about recently, over the past couple of days, about how to normalize discussing postpartum bodies. So that's as far as I've gone in thought, but I find that it's something we don't often talk about. And I recently saw a Facebook post of women who are mothers and also work out and just really sharing what, more about postpartum bodies and the beauty of postpartum bodies. And so, and just the idea of like what it means to still be a woman and a mother and the physical things that we all go through. And so these next couple of poems are getting to that. And I've been really interested in more conversations around that as well. Raising hibiscus. I am a rookie at training up plants. Soil to water ratios, calculating the sun, the right window for the right time of day. But who doesn't love the tropical hibiscus, Rosa sinensis, big mouthed blooms all over their bodies. Watering an infrequent ritual. Following the pot's simple instructions, the sun gives partial light where we are between buildings. I'm not sure it's ever enough, though I pull day-old leaves once they wilt each morning, as is necessary. No one petal lives longer than that. Almost like the baby, the surgeon tells me as we look at where I've been trimmed in high resolution, latched itself in the worst place possible, so close to an artery, one wrong snip and Rosa all over the table. In winter, I move the hibiscus inside, keep the house above room temperature, to simulate a home it knows, pluck petals slowing their open and close, or buds only breaking their skin, falling off if I touch them too softly. Birthmarks. When I tell him naked and a few weeks into dating that the dimples cornering each smiling end of my C-section scar are also scars from the baby snipped from my body months after not making it into my womb, and whom I'm convinced would have been a daughter. He doesn't say anything, only parts and moves his lips down the dried riverbeds of my torso, kissing one blemish and then the other, as if to say, like this, you are still beautiful, you are still whole, you were a mother then too. Or imagining for me her cheeks, her tiny hands catching my face in her palms, what it would have looked like to bring my baby home in the kindest way one can open a mouth. And I have just one more. to the rose bush outside my window. Somehow, the long dead stems on your body have outgrown the ones still alive. The old petals, now sun-charred, balled up at the ends like blank paper left in hands of small children, have managed to hold on through unforgiving winters, the vengeance of their winds, their unwillingness each year to give themselves over to spring, afraid for some reason they will never return, despite just that being the nature of things. What I meant was for this to be a poem of your hybridity, the breeding out of your wild, of your real name. But I'm the one who left you like this, half alive, half memorialed. How do I cut you to keep what still breathes? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Jennifer, that was great. That was really wonderful. Thank you. Okay, and next up, Tara Betts is the author of Break the Habit, Arc and Hue, and the forthcoming Refuse to Disappear. She's a co-editor of The Beijing of America, Personal Narratives About Being Mixed Race in the 21st Century, and editor of the critical edition of Philippa Duke Schuyler's memoir, Adventures in Black and White. In addition to her work as a teaching artist and mentor for young poets, she's taught at Rutgers University, University of Illinois Chicago, and in MFA programs. She is currently the lit editor at New City Magazine and the poetry editor at the Langston Hughes Review. Tara Betts' poetry is at once propulsive and nuanced, finding, quote, a symmetry in the body of living through a range of formal and aesthetic practices. Their poems marked by striking images, some of which cascade with a delirious momentum while others arrive with a stillness and meditative calm, and they always offer a lucid sense of each moment, quote, present and aware, I mark my daily attendance in every breath. Betts' poems mine memories, both personal and historical, of loss and grief, those, quote, little strong licks of heat that echo many hurts. There are considerations of harm, both intimate and systemic, as well as moments of deep joy and gratitude, and the clear sense that these are often inextricably linked. As John Keane notes, quote, alongside tenderness, vulnerability, and healing, Betts shows us through her lyric artistry what self-love and resolve look like. It's a pleasure to welcome Tara Betts.
Thank you. And thank you, Woodland Pattern and Michael, for making this happen under all the duress that we're undertaking at this time. And thank you, Jennifer, for helping us. You know, she was the one who said, we should do Woodland Pattern together. And I was like, yes, because I've always wanted to read here. So I'm really excited about the possibility of reading in present, like in the actual building as well. I'll say that. I'm trying to think. I have pulled a lot of poems that I hope will be a little bit cheerier, but I also was thinking a lot about, I'm coming up on the 10-year anniversary of my divorce. I did not want to get divorced, and my Break the Habit talks a lot about that. So it's kind of weird now to look at this book and realize, wow, it's been that long, and there are things I miss about marriage, but I also have most of the time these feelings like I'm free. I don't know if anybody else can say that, but you know, especially in this point in time, it's really making me think about that idea of freedom and how we think freedom is happy and easy and liberation is going to be wonderful and airy. And I'm like, I don't know about all that. I think it's going to be fraught with a lot of things where we have to think about ourselves differently, you know? So now that I've philosophized a little bit, I'm going to read a poem from the first book, or the second book rather, which is Break the Habit. And I may read another poem from there and then go into some newer work. So I'm looking at, this is a poem when I knew something wasn't right. Divorce wasn't happening yet, but I knew something wasn't right. It's called Drive. Once the papers were signed and the ring was lost, some sparkly payoff at a pawn shop for the moving man, I recalled what my ex-husband said when we drove home together. Night had just slipped into dark blue, and we were headed to a quiet shared bed. He did not pull over, look at me, or take his hand from the wheel. He did not raise his voice. He simply looked at the road ahead when I talked about one of us dying, while wondering aloud if I could find someone like him ever again. The road became more interesting when his monotone responded that he'd be fine without me. I cocked my head without seeing this warning shot. My wedding band tightened while the wheels turned in silence. Maybe not a happier poem, but definitely not as bleak. Is after the divorce, I went and got my PhD, which he didn't want me to do. And I'm very happy about that. And it kind of paved the way for me to be able to come home to Chicago, which he didn't want to come to Chicago either. So boo on him. Uh, but at the time, I lived in Binghamton, New York. And I remember I was coming out of the campus, or coming out of my apartment to head to campus. And I saw a truck in front of my house and they had the windows rolled down and they were listening to Rush Limbaugh. And so this poem kind of comes out of that. Prophetic fragments. Prophecy is rendered as whole mythic animal. It resists, it twists, limbs free, open, billowing wide spread of white, dragging reams over daylight. People turn their heads, ignore quiet attrition. I mince downstairs with a tender ankle and sore foot and lean into a railing with a weight a lover never held. There is no easy sweep that foretells what comes. Besides, one day, steady breath stops. I count inhalations as I deliberately deposit weight on each foot. Underneath, a house's foundation gradually crumbles. The water may be poisoned beyond redemption. It runs, wears away rock, cuts down soil, carries wet in small measures. Prophecy announces titles like Liberation, filling my bag with paperbacks and hardcover spines by poets and preachers. Like I did that morning when a man sat in a dust-beaten truck listening to the pundit yelling about university students, touting liberation theology while sitting in living rooms of dangerous radicals. His truck windows are open and his radio blares, and I silently admit truth. I have done all those transgressions, part of a list longer than this diatribe or James Combs' tomes in my heavy book bag. He pulls off without looking at me. I lift my bag strap, bring it closer while I walk to the bus stop. We head to different destinations. Both of us will eventually become dust, but prophecy calls, insists the future will fragment the myth that he listens to and expects. So those are some from Bake the Habit. I've been trying to write new work. I'm a little slow because I took on a lot of projects so far during our sequestering. I'll say that. I edited a poetry section for this upcoming anthology called Carving Out Rights, and it will be about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and how do we look at human rights in the prison industrial complex. So I wrote this poem for that, and there's going to be some amazing poets in it. I'm super excited. I won't tell you who everybody is. but they're good. Here we go. Think, think. Think about the air invisible as it curls a wave of toxins. Think about how its fingertips trace the skin as a baton falls on the flesh merely seconds later. Think about how heavy metals brown the water and we are told to drink. Think about how many of us wonder the roofs over our heads will be tongues evicted from the languages of home. Think about how every person needs a doctor, but everyone doesn't get one. Think about how savings mean nothing to the crazy fine print circumscribed like obsolete glyphs. Think how law books fall open and hopscotch for anyone who keeps writing checks. Think, 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 like Aretha Franklin belting "What You Trying to Do to Me." Think about how the laws keep shuffling the numbers to fit some constant where acknowledging who is human is posted in some philosophy or some mathematical equation that pretends logic is its function. When blood needs to find something superior, something that denies how human is defined by a much wider net cast by some divine fisherman, or perhaps an African goddess in a gown laced with sea foam, but place markers for faith are constantly moving toward a crucifix. A human can find more than one path, I hope. Think about how every day someone is hoping for some simple thing, like fresh bread lightly toasted, the ability to walk without pain, a chance to shower, a moment free of fist and jeer, a moment singing victorious as if we could level the wrongs and leave the world upright, like a gospel-drenched woman singing freedom, freedom, after forgiveness, after you change your mind because you need to act, not think, to simply be free. Okay. Yay. I love that everybody started doing this because I always think this looks so pretty. And I didn't know it was ASL for a long time, and that makes it even better. So I'll get into the next poem. 2020 also marked me coming to a close on my third year of teaching poetry at Stateville Prison. It is the last of the prisons that had buildings that operated as panopticon style prisons. If you've ever read Michel Foucault's Discipline and Punish, some editions have pictures of Stateville in it. That building, I believe, closed in 2016. Some of my students lived in that building, have written stories about it. And it's been very hard to talk about COVID and know what prisons mean, to see prisons up close and to know that it is definitely a racial thing, an economic thing as far as who ends up in prison. And to sometimes meet people who I'm like, their whole life is gone. Like they might have went in when they were like 16 years old, and then they're older than me, and I'm a lot older than 16. It's very hard. And to know that, they're probably not receiving medical treatment. There's a lot of medical discrimination that people experience because people think they're expendable. So I really encourage you to look into that. I do a lot of work in Chicago with Prison and Neighborhood Arts Project, and we're always trying to do soap and disinfectant drives to Stateville. We've been still trying to teach classes through correspondence, but this is a poem that I wrote for one of my students. I think he got transferred to a minor security facility or his sentence was reduced, and this is for him. So wherever Albert is at, bless you. Small illuminations. 1. Albert is a gentle tower, his arms arched over tabletop like bridge beams or girders. Even if he does not understand everything he reads, he smiles like a good kid, like the kid he probably was 30-some years ago when he was in the wrong car with the wrong people at the wrong time that he will never get back. 2. The attention to detail borders on flawless, unscuffed white sneakers, perfected lined fades, tucked precisely under folded scullies, immaculate with what you got, as clean, hard-fought pride. 3. 1 week, I bring crisp folders, a bunch of sharpened pencils with full pink erasers, round and soft as a doll's blush. They rub away small errors, clearing smudges from a page like an actual correction. 4. I look for Albert's easy grin first when I walk into the concrete block classroom, locked in the education building, relieved that the broken window denies the cold like a plea. One brother in blues with thermal sleeves peeking out of the dull faded ocean of cloth arching over his torso. A cellmate hands me the slightly worn, safeguarded, staple-bound book of poems, the signature, resolute, and matching letters of a poet's name who strolled into the prison like a mother without fear of any child. Margaret Burroughs, more than a decade since she left the cell of her body. I clutch her poems, knowing how they passed from her hands like a prayer. We both smile, small illuminations in a dark hell. When the cellmate says, Albert wanted you to have this. He got transferred. He knew you would keep it safe. So, yeah, Albert's been on my mind, and a lot of other people. One of my students got sick with COVID. One of my students died from COVID. So, you know, I may not have all the money in the world to put into people's commissaries or get them soap, but I can tell people about it and maybe we can all do something. So I'm gonna do my last 2 poems and try to talk less. I wrote this poem because, yeah, we gotta have joy. And then I'm gonna close with a slightly longer poem. Joy don't fold or jingle. In this dystopian viral fog, we somehow manage to dance. In these times where we wonder about evictions and bread, billy clubs and erratic fireworks, bursting skin and nightly sleep, we laugh. We remember Bill Withers and Prince. We celebrate Betty Wright and Gwendolyn Brooks. There are litanies of names braiding our histories to pride and terror, and we say, you have not devoured our clapping, our embraces, our almost solar smiles. We will not give all of them to the ugly. What is hideous in the world has not earned that privilege, and what it has was stolen. We are no longer shushing thieves like arrogant children. We demand that they restore, apologize, repair, unlearn, relearn a world where joy is not for sale, whether the currency be lives or paper. And a few of my Chicago people have probably seen this poem already. It was recently published in the Chicago Reader. I am a huge fan of Lovecraft Country, and I would like to thank my friend Aurelius, who made me go for a walk, who is he's in the reading tonight. He has the sky blue background happening, but the garden that I reference in here is actually a garden in Jackson Park called the Garden of the Phoenix, and it's a garden that was built in 1936. And in 1937, that was the year that H.P. Lovecraft died. So I've been thinking a lot about Lovecraft, not just because of the show, but the responses that people have had to Lovecraft and his racial commentaries, or racialized commentaries, I'll put it like that. Or the story where he has the cat that is named N-Man. That's all I'm gonna say. But, it makes you think, like, these things that we consider classics and we still find value in, like, how do they still cause harm? how did they create harm? And then we didn't even realize it when we were kids, right? Victor LaValle talks about that a lot in his introduction to the annotated H.P. Lovecraft, edited by Leslie Klinger. And he's like, I remember picking up the story in particular that references the cat I'm talking about. And he was like, I looked at the book, and when I saw that, he's like, I threw down the book and I couldn't read Lovecraft again for years. And that's one of our most popular sci-fi and literary writers in fiction today, you know? So, but in any case, that's me rambling. I'll end with this poem. We'll go from there. The Garden of the Phoenix and Lovecraft Country, Chicago, 2020. A Japanese garden nestled against Lake Michigan, with its bridges, pagodas, and arranged stones, produces no skeletons, tentacles, Cthulhu, or Shagas covered with blinking eyes shunning light. Instead, warm sun runs its fingers along my arms. Intermittent shade and a soft breeze twist some cool out of this late August afternoon. I find my footing in Hyde Park, Washington Park, Woodlawn, where manicured serenity offers me paths and a sign that notes this garden began in 1936, before cancer wrapped its claws around H.P. Lovecraft like one of his horrors, before the author of Lovecraft Country was born or able to summon the ghost of a writer who coined an epithet as a cat's name. Some have always said it. Others sidestepped, then substituted two syllables with N-word. We walk to find some sort of middle-aged endurance and laugh with talk of science fiction, how teachers draw on everything they know, and Lovecraft Country with scenes on the South Side we know, where masks now keep viral terror at bay. We laugh about Atticus, not Finch, Uncle George, and Letitia Lewis facing down the children of the night, the opening of ancient portals, collapsing mansions, and ancestral ghosts. And none of them seem more horrifying than mapping green books of Black lives in a stopped car, a car full of men chasing you with rifles and rope or being dragged into the dark woods. Not one monster is scarier than a sheriff with a gun, a badge, too much authority, and a name for you and yours. I say no, nothing is scarier than that. We walk back to the car, how Black fingers cling to the edge of the city as we drive home before sundown in this damned and beloved town where Southside transforms into a code like alien or race. So, thank you guys. I'm clapping for you. Okay. So I don't know, Michael, what do you want to do from here? But I thank you guys for joining us. It's good to see some people I really haven't seen in a while and some people I see on the regular. You know, I see Lori waving away. She's just like, ah! She's a new Hyde Parkian. If you have not checked out her scholarship on Black writers, she's wonderful and brilliant. You know, so.
Well, thank you so much. That was amazing. Jennifer, again, thank you. And yeah, now we're like, you know, we can segue into a conversation, question and answer. If people have, you know, things they'd like to know more about, questions about the work, questions about, you know, just life in general, anything, I don't know. No, but if you have questions for Tara and Jennifer, so the way that we can handle this is if you want to, like, you know, speak your question with your physical mouth, you can raise your hand and we can like unmute and do that just to like keep it so that like we don't have a bunch of people unmuted at once. Otherwise, you can throw questions in the chat too, and we can sort of like get to those.
Let me pull it up right. Okay.
The order they arrive. So, you know, think about it for a moment. Let it stew.
I love when you guys have such thoughtful comments and you quote the poem. This is how you know who the real listeners are. They quote the poem and you're like, whoa.
We do have not a question from Rebecca Morgan Frank, not a question, but any hopes of an encore poem from each of you?
Oh, shoot. I think I just closed the last poem I'm gonna look at. Hold on. But I mean, I would love to take questions.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm a little more irreverent than my poems are. So Jennifer would probably be agreeing with you more than you know. Oh, thank you, Peter. Yes, I do like to, one of my favorite things, I'll say this, since I've gotten a PhD, has anybody ever seen that Sidney Poitier movie where he says, they call me Mr. Tibbs? So he goes, they call me Mr. Tibbs. And he says it very, I'll be like, they call me Dr. Betts. Yeah. It's one of those wonderful moments after you go through it. And Brenda Cardenas has joined us. There's C.K. Kubasta. I'm happy there's Wisconsin poets that I really like who have joined us. And Dustin Pearson, who's an amazing young poet that I met at the Watering Hole. If you have not read his work, I highly recommend it.
Am I imagining it? Did I see a hand up, Lori? Hand up? Or is that not a hand? Okay. Maybe I imagined that.
So there is a question.
Oh yeah, look at that. Okay.
There's a couple. Yep.
Okay, so Christina Kabasta. Hi Tara, how's the No Mortgage project going? Can you talk about that?
Of course I can. We have made good progress. Unfortunately, the building that we were originally looking at was sold. So if you go to #Whirlwind Center, I was making an effort to buy a building that would be a turnkey building that I could live on site and also host artistic classes, events, workshops, and so on and so forth on the South Side. For the simple fact that there are not as many creative hubs that offer space for creative people on the South Side of Chicago. Most of them are very far north, especially for the literary arts. And we made almost $50,000 during COVID. Right now, one of my board members is planning a benefit with some local comedians. The one who is spearheading it has performed all over the country and in Canada. And he was one of my former writing students when he, many years ago. He's a grown up now with wife and kids. And I was like, oh my God, yeah, you were in that class. So the #Team No Mortgage is definitely a Jennifer Steele creation. We were shooting big because we wanted to just have the building be ready. And then when COVID got more serious, we just were not able to foresee paying money out for a building yet. So we're going to do some online Zoom events and try to make people aware that we're here and we're starting to make things happen. My buddy and compatriot in this work, Aurelius Rains, just posted a link to the GoFundMe campaign. It may close at the end of the end of September. So if you want to donate, doesn't matter if it's a small amount, a big amount, I appreciate any of the help. And as Aurelius said, joy don't fold or jingle. And then I guess that's it. I don't know what else to say about it right now, but I appreciate everybody who's reached out to help that campaign take on a life of its own. And I have a list of artists and programs that we want to start. And I'm hoping to do at least 1 or 2, maybe 3 Zoom events before 2020 ends.
Yes, that's amazing.
Thank you.
And yeah, there's another question also, Mary Guntner, I hope I'm saying that right. What was the type of prison you mentioned?
Yeah, Stateville Prison is a maximum security facility for men, and it was once a panopticon style prison, which basically Foucault described them in Discipline and Punish, where it's constructed in such a way so it's in the round. So all the cells are on the periphery in a round formation, and then in the middle there's supposed to be a spot where, you know, a person can watch everything that everyone is doing, but you can't see that who's watching you. And basically it was based on this philosophical idea that you would police your own behavior based on the fear that someone is watching you all the time. And for a long time, Stateville was the oldest panopticon style prison that still had a functional building until it closed in 2016. They had to close the building down and condemn it. But they're talking about doing tours, which I don't know how I feel about that, but you know.
Thank you. Okay, one from Peter to Jennifer. Your book addresses body and the home. Where does one end and the other begin for you? In what part of that home do poems live?
That's a good question. You know, it's funny, I was thinking about this yesterday. I was listening to a song, and it's escaping what song it was. And it was a line that said, shoot, what was it? It was so compelling. It was the idea that home essentially is not a place, it's a person, right? It's not a place, it can be a person, like, and that really resonates with me. So as someone who, I think it comes up a lot for me because I am here in Chicago, my family's, all in Connecticut. So this is a constant conversation I'm having with myself, and the idea of what is home, where is home, how do I, consider home or create home, and the idea that the body is the only thing that you can ever take with you in any sense of movement. Like every day, like you live in your body is essentially your mobile home. So I really appreciate that question because it's something that it shows up and I have to think about. It's the idea that this is the only home that I have, essentially, that does not change, is the body. And really understanding how the body is in conversation and how we live with ourselves, how we sit with ourselves. Yeah, and so I love to think about the idea of body, and I love home. So I'm a big HGTV person. I'm a big my house, the concept of like, it is a, when I, my house was, when we moved in, it just, you could tell it just, the energy, like it needs a lot of love and attention. And so I often think about the idea of bodies and the rooms within our bodies, or making space, who we make space for in our homes and our bodies. And so, yeah, it's just a constant conversation. It's always, really, really fascinating to sort of, and I don't think about it, I don't really think about it as I'm writing it. I'm very reflective of the work once it's been written. So, sometimes I'm like, I should be more intentional, like going into the poem, but I love the idea that I just write these things and they tend to say what they need to say. And I find that these are the themes that keep coming up. And so paying attention to the why and the how of that. So, yeah, thank you for that question.
So much, Jennifer, and thanks, Peter, for the question. And Peter, I just have to say, our Woodland Pattern's Book Center manager, and I mention it because if you look at his screen, right behind him is Woodland Pattern. So, hi, Woodland Pattern. Oh. Oh, someday we'll have a reading there. Okay. Yeah. All right. Any other questions or topics of conversation from anyone? I really appreciate you all being here. And again, thank you so much, Jennifer and Tara. Those were amazing readings. And we will sometime, hopefully very soon, be in that space behind Peter, have a reading there. But until then, this has been wonderful.
Thank you so much. It was fun.
So thank you all.
Thank you.
And hope you join us again for our next virtual event until we can see you all in Woodland Pattern. Thanks and have a great night, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for
Buy
joining us.
books from independent bookstores. Yes.
Yes. Bye.
All right.